Right. Well, it's great to see all of you. So today we're getting together to start a 3-part series on restorative consequences. Today, what we're going to be covering is, and many of you have already downloaded your handouts. I think we're all good on that. But what we're going to be covering today is really starting off with defining what are we talking about with consequences and punishment. So we want to kind of get clear on what do we mean when we say that? What does it really mean? What are some of the assumptions that we're making in terms of what punishment is supposed to do with student behavior? And then I'm going to introduce the 3 components of a restorative consequence, which is restoration, sanction, and intervention. And we're going to today dive into mainly the blue circle, restoration. And we're going to talk about restorative agreements and accountability. And that is mainly the gist. So today, part 1, restoration. Next time we get together, it'll be sanctions. So we're not throwing sanctions completely out of the window. I know a lot of people think, oh, with restorative practices and PBIS, you don't ever do a sanction or a punishment. So we'll talk about that, what those could look like. And then our last session together, we're going to talk about interventions. And that should feel pretty comfortable for you since you've been doing PBIS for several years and you have a lot of great things going. So some of it's just kind of putting it all together and thinking about this as not 2 separate things, restorative practices over here, PBIS over here, traditional disciplinary, it's like, how can we kind of bring some of this together? So that's what we're going to work on, but we're going to start with a circle. So why don't we stand up or move over to the side? And I have the 2 rounds for you. And Kelly, do you have a talking piece? Something?
Yes, sure I do.
Anyone in your bag, reach something in your bag that's meaningful to you.
My wallet.
Yay, she won. Your wallet? All your credit cards and money. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the first question, which is, and everyone here knows each other, right? So you all, first name basis, great. And I've met everybody there, I think. So good to see you. So the first question that I have is, if you could go on a trip anywhere, where would you go and who would you take with you, living or dead? So I'll start. If I could go on a trip anywhere, I would go to Lyle Canyon in Yosemite, up in Tuolumne Meadows with my dad, where we used to backpack every summer together. And he's not alive anymore, so he's coming back. Okay, that's good. I took notes. So I think that, so what I heard was bullying strategies, which is actually the final lesson in your course is lesson 15. So if you want to jump ahead and do that one now, but you do need to know how to do some of the restorative conversations to do the whole thing. So that'll be helpful. Kind of how to handle it when kids are crying in the office. And that's sort of like when they feel like they're in trouble versus accountability. I think some of that is, a lot of these questions actually are around, and you guys can sit down if you want, moving your staff, right? So if your language is really consistent about accountability versus being in trouble, and you're walking the walk and all that, I think they will catch up eventually to what you're, that trouble versus accountability. And they actually have to see it happen probably. And then kids will, then they'll start talking like that to kids, and then kids will be like, oh, this is a different place. I'm not, getting yelled at anymore. So that happens. Higher level discipline. So we'll talk about that. What do we do when adults are getting defensive? So that is going to come when we talk about prep work. I think you did the right thing when you time out, like this isn't going well, like we're going to stop right now. Because what you don't want to do is put a kid in a situation where they're going to get reharmed by a teacher. Matching behavior with sanction, we'll work on that in the next few sessions. And changing the staff idea of punishments, how exclusion perpetuates a problem, and actually that buddy classrooms are still exclusionary, right? I think that was really, it's like, at least it's not as long as going to the office, but they're still out of class. They still were sent away. So how can we do that maybe a little differently? And then real change in behavior? Like, how do we really see actual change? And what if it sounded almost like you were asking about the kid coming to the office because they were enjoying the attention from you. And that was the last comment. And I probably, like, I don't know if I heard everything you guys were saying. I would say that, well, the PBIS answer would be, we'll put them on a point sheet, let them earn time with you, and so then that's like pretty cool. But part of me in the back of my mind is, you patch them up and put them together, you put them back in class and they fall apart. How do we change the setting so they don't fall apart? And I'm sure other people are thinking that too, like they're getting triggered by certain teachers or certain situations. Like, what do we need to do? But you've been building trust for 3 weeks, like you said. So maybe now you're going to be able to do some problem solving with the kid. So what do we need to set up in class so this doesn't happen? And if you don't blow out for this many days, you're going to get to come see me and we're going to do whatever, like that. So, I mean, you could kind of frame it like that, but that's sort of yeah. But I think I heard anything that you guys said that I didn't catch. I mean, some of this we're going to answer a little more in detail. Most of it we'll talk in more detail. But anything else that I didn't catch from what you said? Because it was kind of hard to hear. Thumbs up. I got it.
I think that's good.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's kind of get started. So we know that we've been implementing PBIS for a long time. We also now, you're layering in restorative practices to your work. So what that means is that each tier of intervention, you're going to have different types of restorative practices going on. So at tier 1, you're going to be having classroom circles. That's kind of that number 1 right there, under tier 1. You're also on number 3, when you respond to behavior, teachers will be using a lot of restorative language with the kids. So that should be happening tier 1. Tier 2, this is when you all step in and you start to respond to behavior as administrators, right? So what we want to have in this is, in addition to your kind of core PBIS interventions, you also want to be skilled in doing restorative chats, circles, and mediations. And these are going to be a series that we're going to be doing where you're going to learn each of those, but we're going to be practicing some of them today. Then at tier 3, you have your basic kind of PBIS research-based interventions like behavior plans, FBAs, individualized services, wraparound, but you're also going to be doing restorative conferences and reentry circles. So reentry is when they come back from suspension. So these are like bigger scale, a lot of people involved, very structured, like a conference is very structured. And that would be something that you would need to attend, like the IIRP training is 2 days to run like a really big, kind of intense one like that. But I can train you to do the other ones without us being in person generally. So this is how it works. So we have like tier 1, this is what we're trying to pull together, right? Now, if we look down on step 5, we are correcting behavior at tier 1 with restorative languages and responses, right? Tier 2, we also here in tier 2 are doing restorative practices with chats, mediations, and circles. And in tier 3, restorative conferences and reentry circles. So responding to behavior at tier 1 is kind of where we're landing with this whole idea of punishment and consequences. So in schools, what do we mean when we say consequences? People say he needs to have consequences. So let's hear, what do people mean, do you think, when they say that? I can't hear. Maybe lean in towards the speaker.
They lose something, so they lose a recess and lose lunch with friends.
Yeah, take something away. Okay. What else do you think that like, what is this like, all the connotations behind all this?
Punishment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what's the assumption behind punishment? Like, why do they want you to do this?
It'll make you not do it in the future.
Yeah, they'll learn a lesson.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And not just them, right? Everyone around them. Everyone around them is going to learn if we do this consequence thing. So a behaviorist would say, now a consequence is just, from a behavioral perspective, anything that follows, antecedent behavior consequence. It's anything that follows the behavior. It's the immediate neck thing. So that's not really a behaviorist. That's not what we mean. What people mean is they mean punishment. And the actual definition of a punishment is you give something to, or you take something away from someone following the misbehavior to reduce the likelihood that they're going to do it again. So I'm going to take away your recess in the hope that you won't do that behavior again. And to a certain extent, it kind of works, right? For some kids, it could. Or the fear of it, it could work a little bit, in terms of them, not wanting to like have to stay in at recess or not wanting to, different things that they have to do. But this is essentially what people mean by that. Now, a restorative consequence is more full. So it's our whole response. It's consequence in the actual meaning, what follows the behavior. We're going to include restoration that heals, sanctions that repair, and interventions that teach. So we're going to do all three. And to be honest, as you look at higher level, more intense behaviors, you're going to want to draw on all three of these legs of the stool more. For low level things, you can kind of get away with doing one or two, but maybe not all three. So restoration that heals, sanctions that repair, and interventions that teach. So this is kind of the three legs. So today we're focused on restoration. So let's talk about like what a restorative school kind of versus a traditional school would look like. So let's say you have a student, Jason. He has a heated argument with his parents before leaving for school. He's running late. So we're going to see the difference, how restorative practices at the school would look for the whole campus, okay? So we have two options, a restorative system or a zero tolerance system. So Jason comes to school, he's running late, right? It's had a rough morning. So in a zero tolerance school, he's greeted by metal detectors and a police search. Now that's how I started my career in Long Beach, California. I started by, it was in the 90s in LA. It was a really kind of dangerous time, a lot of gang activity. And I had to walk through a metal detector and have my bag searched, razor wire on at least 12-foot high chain link fence like school. So Jason is greeted by that. He's late for first period. His teacher scolds him in front of the class. He talks back and he gets a detention after school. Then in the cafeteria at lunch, he gets into a minor altercation with another student. So a school resource officer detains and arrests both students. The school administrators suspend them from school. Jason is held in a juvenile facility all afternoon. He misses school. Now he has an arrest record and he's suspended for several days. So that's that, zero tolerance system that has really been in place, at least in my career, most of my career, until maybe 10 years ago, when my school district started implementing PBS and restorative practices. So an alternative would be in a restorative system that when Jason arrives, he's welcomed by teachers and staff and his classmates, even though he's late. He's still late, right? Now, his teacher notices that he's upset. So she waits till after class to talk to him, learn a little more, and she set up a meeting with the counselor for later in the day. Now, Jason still gets into a fight. So I think what we sometimes forget is that we can do everything right and kids are still going to act out. They're still going to do what they're going to do. The train is already on the track, right? But in this situation, Jason gets into the altercation in the cafeteria. The school staff intervene. They sit the students down. They de-escalate the situation. So here we're talking with a restorative conversation, right? Then Jason, the other student, agreed to help clean up the cafeteria during a free period because they made a mess in the cafeteria, which required more work for the custodian. And then Jason meets with his counselor and his parents after school to help resolve the conflict at home. So these are the two paths that I feel are very realistic. I have some stories that are even crazier than this in terms of the zero tolerance. Things that, the kid on the skateboard with earbuds in. We had one situation in my previous district where there's a kid skating after school across the campus at a high school. And he wasn't supposed to, but he had earbuds in. So the assistant principal's yelling at him to walk, get off your skateboard. And he didn't get off. So the assistant principal goes to him and is like, get off your skateboard. The kid, like, they end up in this like tussle. They drag the kid into the office because the kid was ignoring the direction. They end up somehow scrabbling on the ground in the office. They end up realizing this kid has a weapon, like a knife that he had in his bag all day long. And he had a weapon in his bag, a knife in his bag. And he thought that they were going after, that they knew somehow. So he was like trying to get away. The school resource officer ends up tackling the guy too. And they end up finding this. Anyway, he ends up getting arrested. And it really started, like, he would have been just, had gone home on a skateboard, but this whole thing like unraveled. So there is something to be said for like approaching things a little differently, in these situations. So I want you to turn, I'd like you to find an elbow partner. So this is the person right next to you. And I'd like to turn and talk with them in talking about these two different paths. What resonates with you? What do you think about? What sounds familiar to you in this, or not familiar? We're educators, right? And I think that we've gotten sloppy, to be honest. I have never phrased it like that, but what I'm about to share with you is research on the brain. And we should be comfortable with this, like neurology, right? And not say, well, I don't believe in that. I don't believe that we shouldn't reward kids is one, or I don't believe that kids shouldn't have consequences, or blah, blah, blah. Like, and that's not what I'm saying, that kids shouldn't have consequences. We know that kids need boundaries to feel safe, right? But let's actually look at what the research says about what happens in the brain, and then like do the right thing for the kids. So when we talk about, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but when we talk about these kind of tracks of what we're doing with kids, what we're really trying to do is get them out of kind of this triggered trauma, fight, flight, freeze response, which is pretty much everything that Jason is experiencing here, from, his argument with his parents before he even got to school, and everything is like just getting worse and worse, right? And his capacity to cope is not there. And so what we want to do is we want to help them cope. And so they end up making better choices. We can't be reflective if we're in fight, flight, freeze, right? Our frontal lobe isn't even working at that point. We're just reaction, like animal brain, right? And so what we want to do is we want to help move kids as easily and prevent them from going into that kind of trauma mentality. With like adrenaline, all that stuff. We want that not to happen. So what we want to have, though, is what we really want is this like neurobiology of trust, relationships, and connection. This is actually what we want. So research shows that when we have trust and relationships and connection, our brain is literally washed off. That the stress hormones, adrenaline, all that, is literally washed off with this oxytocin cascade. It's this love hormone, and it makes you feel like good when you talk and people listen to you. This is why you want to talk to your best friend when you've had a hard day, or you talk to your therapist, or you get a hug, right? There's different ways that we connect with people. And so this is what we want to trigger in kids. Research actually shows that you can rewire a traumatized child's brain by putting them in a setting with trust, relationships, and connection. So what we're looking at here is setting up an entire school. So, the kid doesn't go into the office and they cry, and then they get all patched up and they feel good, which is what you just described to me. So they have that oxytocin cascade with you. Then they go into class, and now they're triggered again. And now we're back into fight, flight, freeze, and F you lady, you can't make me, and all the things that they do when they're in that place. And if we set up schools that are good for kids with traumatized brains, it's going to be good for everyone. So we also know that teacher burnout and stress is no joke, right? And the dynamic that we're setting up of punishment and consequences is more stressful because it's not working. It doesn't change behavior. And so here's the research on teacher stress. So you have cortisol. This is that, like, your stress hormones. It's very high for all of us in the morning when we get up and we got to get cooking and we're making our coffee and we're getting dressed, and then it tapers off throughout the day and it kind of levels out. Well, in someone that qualifies, they did a study and they did like cheek swabs, and they looked at cortisol levels in teachers, and they compared teachers that had like normal stress. Okay. And then you had teachers that scored high on the burnout scale, like on a survey. And they looked at their cortisol level. And what they found is that people that were burnt out or extremely stressed had high cortisol throughout the day, and it was elevated throughout the day. Then they compared the stress level, the cortisol level of the students in those teachers' classes. And what they found is that they were the same. In fact, that the student in the teacher that was incredibly stressed out actually like kicked up, their stress was elevated throughout the day and then got even higher. So what we're looking at here is that our teacher well-being and our student well-being are intricately tied. And whatever we do to help student stress, we're going to help teacher stress. And whatever we do to help teacher stress, we're going to help student stress. So it's kind of all for one and one for all. So that's just kind of that little neurology stuff on the side. So what we know is that zero tolerance policies have not been shown to improve school climate or safety at all. So this kind of reaction, we're not going to tolerate it. Don't do this, don't do that, is not making school safe, and it's not making kids feel good at school, not making teachers feel good. So there is a reason that we do that. The Gun-Free Schools Act passed in 1994. And we have had a huge escalation of suspensions and expulsions ever since. And around a few years after this happened is when PBIS came on the stage and restorative practices in schools came on the stage in order to kind of look at an alternative way to do things. Because we were having, we have tons and tons of expulsions and suspensions. This exclusionary discipline started here. And it really probably late 80s, but things when I was a kid would have gotten a phone call home now became punishable in court. Like I could literally be arrested, as a student, which that couldn't happen before. So that's really what we're looking at. So that idea of why do we use sanctions? Why do we want to punish, or we think people need to cool off? We want to remove unsafe youth. We say, what will the other kids think if I let him get away with this, right? So there's all of this like thinking about doing this. And it looks like it works. In the moment, the kid's gone, like go to the other classroom or leave my class or take 3 days off to play video games, otherwise known as suspension. They're gone, and it's this immediate relief, like no kidding. It's like this relief for everybody, staff members, teachers, peers, administrators, everybody's like, phew, I can teach, I can learn, all that. And we're putting 100% of the responsibility on change on that kid and their family. So we're off the hook, right? So it's like, this is why we keep doing it, is it actually has a rather immediate response for us. It's much quicker than all the deep work we would need to do to really change the behavior. So this is why it feels like why we keep doing it. But yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Can I ask a question about that though?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I forget that the thing's here, but I look there. So, and I totally I need to change my mind still, just, to be completely transparent on consequence, sanction, all that stuff. My fear is like, if we have a kid who is like high on like smoking marijuana, how do we then still keep them in school and not do the take them home, because they shouldn't be in class at that point, but then removing them from class is still a exclusionary, so I think you
need to have like your own kind of rules so you know what you're going to do. In my previous district, we had a saying, I think I started it, but it went like this. It said, we only suspend if you need to sleep it off or you need to cool off.
Okay.
So in my mind, that's a medical issue, although I would have suspended. I don't think it's fair to just send them home as like they're sick. I think you need to actually record it, as a suspension. And we came up with a whole protocol for drugs and alcohol that involved, only the parent could pick up, and you had to document that you released the child to the parent. They had to go to the doctor, or we had to call, 911 or call the nurse. This is like a medical issue, but we did not let them sit at home for 3 days. Kids with drug and alcohol addiction and problems are not the kind of kids you want sitting at home. These are the kids that need to be in, like, even if you do an in-house or something, but they need to not be home, because what if something happened? What if they overdose? They're just going to get more addicted. So we actually came up with a protocol that I can share with you, and we're actually won like a congressional, I guess it was like an award for the program that we set up in Napa Valley Unified. But basically the kid got a citation, and then they had a series of evening parent classes with their parents that were quite well run by the city of Napa. And then they had different types of like interventions and the diversion program, and a lot of services kicked in for the students that when they were either in possession or under the influence at school. So, but they did not get suspended. That day, they'd get sent home for medical kind of care, but that was recorded as like a part day suspension. But the next morning they were back, and these services were getting triggered. So that was that idea, particularly with drugs and alcohol, that we need to take it really seriously, because now's the time, like, they're getting very entrenched in addiction, and we want to disrupt that. We don't want to help with them becoming more addicted by letting them have a lot of free time and no supervision at home. That's a long answer to what you're asking, but that's, it's a good question. So what we know, so we think, sanctions feel like they work in the moment. It's basically a reward. If we're going back to like behaviorism, because we get this immediate positive rush, like, phew, it's a relief, he's gone, right? However, in the long run, what we know from the research is that punitive consequences, particularly like exclusionary ones that are separating you from the child, really, it reduces motivation. Honestly, they leave and they think, well, she hates me anyway. And how many times do they go to your office and what do they always say about their teachers? She hates, yeah, she hates me. He hates me. They always say that, and the teachers, when you ask them, they're like, I don't hate him. I don't know. Why do they think, and it's this conflict. And that's what the kids think, that they hate them. So kids won't learn from people that they don't like, and so that's where we get into that. So it reduces motivation. We're not teaching appropriate behavior. We're saying get out. Research shows that the more punitive we are, the more we have truancy, dropout, vandalism, and aggression. Now that study from Mayer was done in like 1991. So we already knew this research before we enacted the law in 1994. And by the way, Columbine was in 1997. So it didn't do anything for school safety. It just like created the school to prison pipeline is what it did. Long-term effect on behavior, very little. And it harms the school community, because for the other kids, like, yeah, in the moment they have this relief, that this kid isn't there that day, but he's coming back. and we know, and they can tell, like, this isn't working, and the staff can't handle this kid. And they want us to be able to handle all the kids, or get that kid in the right place where he's getting the right kind of help, something, but they don't want to see the teacher losing it, things like that. So that's how that kind of rolls. See, there we go. Bottom line, can't punish kids into being good. It just doesn't work. If our goal, now I'll put this caveat, if your goal is to change behavior, to make them good, punishment isn't going to work. What I really think is going on is essentially when we say we're punishing, and one of you mentioned this earlier, we're trying to like inflict pain, basically. We're trying to do something that's so like unpleasant to the child that they're not want to engage in that behavior, right? So we're like in this game with them about like, how unpleasant can I make your life? How much can I hurt you so you won't hurt me. And it gets into this retribution cycle. And that's kind of what even Desmond Tutu called it. Like in the West, as opposed to African justice, we have this retributive justice system. And it's not your fault for thinking that way. It's not your teacher's fault for thinking that way. It's our culture that retribution is the answer. But we're going to sit back and we're going to take a deep breath, and we're going to be educators that know research, and we're going to stop doing things that defy what we know in the research. This is Daniel Sarad, the founder of Common Justice, and she said, we've shown up at a burning house with a hose full of gasoline. Every time we approach these kids with punishment, particularly the kid that's already disengaged, traumatized, harmed, like we're just adding fuel to the flame. So I want you to talk to your elbow partner again in talking about consequences and punishment. What's something that resonates with you? And what's something you'd like to rethink in your school and in your systems, maybe in response to the science? All right, let's come on back. Now, are there any things that came up for you that you'd like to kind of share or ask in terms of just reflecting on your practice? Anything come up like, I'm still stuck on this? Now, we'll probably get to it, but I want to make sure if there's anything that came up for you.
I can share what Sandy and I discussed.
Great.
So we have students who might have a behavior inside the classroom. We might come down to the office, we might help solve that. It might even be a referral. We take all those steps. We'll call home, we do those kind of things, but that teacher-student relationship is still not mended. And so I think that's where we probably fail. And so when I'm thinking of rethinking things, we don't have this, like we do a great job, I'm awesome at it. I got all the things going on in my office, but I don't have the thing going on between the student and the teacher. And so that's the thing that I think that fails the most for me personally inside the school. And so Sandy and I were just talking about how do you make that happen? And what is the capacity to make that happen? And then what's the time frame? And I can give you my day yesterday, but it wasn't filled with one of those incidents. Yeah. And so that happens numerous times throughout the day. So you know, it's just making sure that everyone is on the same page with how we get that accomplished and how the teacher does that, because their ultimate goal for 6-7 periods a day is to teach the other 120 students. Yeah. And so they're happy to be like, yeah, I need a break from that student. I'm not going to go and mend that relationship or take time out of my day to mend that relationship, even though it will help the long game, I guess.
Well, and you know, to add to that though, sometimes the teachers don't have those skills either.
True.
Because I covered for a teacher yesterday because I was noticing the same thing, that the teacher wasn't connecting. And so when I got called, they said, you know what, I'm going to take over your lesson. Unfortunately, it was reading, so I knew what to do. And I was like, you go connect with the child. She was out there for about 10 minutes and came back in and was like, can't do it.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, maybe they need a little more scaffolding. Like, what do you mean when you say that?
Yeah,
that would be probably helpful. Yeah.
And I think there's a sense of authority when I, as a principal, when I go in there versus the teacher, because I don't know, there is a respect thing that happens, or something that happens, not for every kid, but for a lot of the kids. So the kid really does not have the relationship with that teacher like I might have, or they look at me different when I go into a classroom, for sure. So yeah, not saying I'm best at having any of those conversations, saying I do get looked at a little bit differently.
Well, I think as we share, as you learn about how to do a restorative chat, which you're going to get like an actual webinar on that, and we'll talk a little bit about it today. I think you'll see like basically, and if you want, you can watch the 14-minute video. Also in the series, in your course, it's session 9, office referrals and restorative chats. So that one is, it's like 14 minutes, and it's very helpful in terms of thinking through how would that look. But basically the idea is in restorative practices, the people in the conflict have to work it out, meaning kid and teacher. You can like stand on your head in your office, like you can do all this like magical stuff. It's almost like not worth your time, to be honest. Like, it's not about you, right? Like, you're not the one with the problem with the kid. We need to like get the kid and the teacher together, but you got to do a scaffolding. Like you just found out, like they don't even know how to do it. Go connect with the kid. They're like, I don't know what you mean, that kind of thing. So I think that if we can train our staff what to expect when we do these restorative chats, they're going to come along, because the truth is, what do they go home stressing about? They're going home stressing about that terrible interaction with that kid. That's what they're bringing, that's what's causing their cortisol levels to be high. That's one of the 5 or 6 main causes of burnout for teachers. So student behavior is one, school climate. Believe it or not, their relationship with their colleagues is on that list of 5. So if we could get restorative practices going for them also with adults, it would also help their stress level. So that's something to think about there. So I want to talk for a minute about diversity, equity, and inclusion, how restorative practices is going to help you with this. So really, when we talk about, we really honor, when you do classroom circles, you're honoring everyone's individual story and them as a unique person. Nobody's more important than other people. So even the teacher is going to sit at the same height, pass the talking piece. I even showed you when I was running the circle just now, even though I'm on screen, I answered the same questions you did, right? I talked about my dad and backpacking. And so I share the same. People take turns, they listen deeply, we don't interrupt. So it's going to cultivate that trust and promoting fairness. So if you have a teacher that's struggling to connect with her students, like what you were just describing, circles will help her begin to have these positive interactions with these kids in more meaningful ways. And it's structured. And it'll give her kind of a scaffold of like how to start these kind of conversations. And then you have inclusion, because we're validating everybody's experience, everyone's need. And when we're all talking, it tends to elevate voices of people that have been marginalized or oppressed or harmed. So that is actually really important. And when there's conflict, we definitely bring together the voice, like elevate the voice of the person that's been marginalized or harmed, right? Now, PBIS also reduces disproportional discipline. So it addresses diversity, equity, and inclusion by creating consistency and reducing reactivity. Data keeps us accountable. And in your data, when you're doing, PBIS, you're actually looking at ethnicity data. And, we should be looking at this kind of thing and reflecting on it because it'll change our practice. But this reducing, when we're all consistent, behavior gets better for sure. We don't need to be reactive. All the grownups talk the same. And we can do something about vulnerable decision points. Let me tell you what that is really quick. So, you had your implicit bias training, but basically everybody has it. It's unconscious, automatic, and it's based on stereotypes, not on reality. So it's not usually an indication of what you really believe, but it's back there. It's like infused in our culture, right? And it really only rears its ugly head under a couple circumstances. Snap decisions when you got to be fast. So that never happens in school, right? There's never any pressure, right? And any kind of decision that's ambiguous, like you're sitting, well, I don't know, what should I do, right? Then it comes up. So implicit bias at work, believe it or not, attractiveness. Did you know that real estate agents are rated that if they're more attractive, they actually sell homes for higher prices? That's why they put their picture up, I guess. I don't know. And every inch of height is worth $789 per year in salary. If you look at statistically, like our presidents of the United States and how they're actually very tall, white men, they're all tall. Very few of them were short until I think before we had cameras and stuff, but definitely we think taller people are smarter. Implicitly, right? It's back there. So the unidimensional view of bias is like, okay, we're racist, right? Or we have bias. And that's why we have disproportionate discipline, like that we have people really believe, that kids with a certain color skin are bad kids or something like that. And it's not what's going on. It's really not. Educators by and large are really like want to change the world, like they got into this for all the right reasons. Really what's happening is it's situations. The situation influences what they do. So we have something called a vulnerable decision point. Remember when I said, if you're under stress, snap decision, something's ambiguous, we don't quite know what to do, but we got to do it quick. It can be anything like subjective behavior. We're hungry, we're tired, with a vague discipline system. There's like, they don't know the kid, or there's prior incident. All of these things make this a vulnerable decision point where our bias might kick in, okay? There's even studies that show if you have to go to court, you do not want to have your time before the judge right before lunch or right at the end of the day. You're going to have a much harsher sentence. Hungry and tired, right? Hangry. So the 5 things that we know, and this you can find on pbis.org, to do to help your school discipline be more equitable, is start off with really effective academic instruction that's engaging, right? That's going to help reduce the achievement gap. So that's the first thing to do. PBIS is your foundation of prevention. We all are on the consistent. We don't have kind of different people doing different things. That really helps. In PBIS, you use data, and you should be looking at your data. You also want to develop policies with accountability for disciplinary equity. I know San Francisco Unified, if you want to suspend a student of color, you have to call the district office. In Napa, we had a policy for any student, really. Anytime you're about to do a suspension, you always would cross-check with another administrator in your building. Tell the situation. Do you have any other ideas for me? Or like elementary principals would talk to other people, but really by the end, elementary, we never suspended anyway, hardly ever. Maybe like once or twice a year or something like that. And then we want to teach neutralizing routines for vulnerable decision points. So what that means is we don't put teachers in the situation where they should be making any kind of disciplinary decision. So your office referral, for example, all they need to do is ask for help. They do not need to say 30-minute detention, stay in at lunch. Like, don't ask them to make a decision in terms of a consequence. That's a no-go. That needs to be made by a third party who's not escalated, not involved, and can be objective. All the teacher needs is a system, whether it's an office referral or we call and someone comes to the room, that's a restorative chat, where they get help and support. That's really all they want. If you think about the Breakfast Club moment where, it's Jude Law is mouthing off and the assistant principal is like, that's another Saturday school. And he keeps mouthing off, that's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 months, right? And it's just going back. It's it's crazy. You don't want to put any kind of adults in a situation in a charged, stressful environment to make a decision on discipline, right? How many people say, looking back, when you were really stressed and you made a decision, you look back on that and you think that's the best decision I ever made in my life, right? Never. It's always the worst one. So we don't want to put people in that position. So if you have an office referral or any system where teachers are assigning consequences in the heat of the moment, you want to change that system. That would be a neutralizing routine, okay? So you can pull your data and you can look at, this is Swiss, but you have a different system. You should be able to look at risk and look at students by ethnicity and race. So you got risk ratio, risk index, rates by group, and you should be able to look at this data. So this is sort of one other reason why we're doing this work. Okay. So our 3 components, restoration, sanction, and intervention. Let's get into the meat of what we mean with restoration, okay? So that's the first one we're going to talk about, because I think sometimes if you just do this part, everything solves itself, okay? So I want you, we're going to get up and move. If you were to think, okay, between sanction, restoration, intervention, which of these am I the strongest in? Restoration, meaning I know how to do like restorative conversations. I help heal harm and bring people back together. Sanction is I'm good with the punishments, or like maybe I do creative stuff, but it's definitely kind of a consequence. Or maybe you got like a great menu of interventions. You've been doing PBIS a long time. You got all these interventions going at your school. So Kelly, if you could let people know which corner is each one. And what you're going to do is you're going to find a partner in that corner and say, why are you strong in this area? Like, what are you doing well in this area? And it's not bad to be good at sanctions either. We're going to talk about that. So pick a corner, where are you the strongest, and have a conversation about why did you choose this corner? So we're going to take about 4 minutes. Okay, time. Now what I'd like you to do is I want you to move again. Now, choose the corner where you feel the weakest or where you need the most support. So move to sanction, restoration, intervention, and find a partner and talk about, why is this your greatest need or your weakness? What kind of resources or knowledge would you need to make this better? Okay, we'll do another 4 minutes. Okay, come on back. All right, so let's take some share outs from the group. Is, why, tell me about this kind of experience. Why did you pick the corner you did? And what came up for you? Let's take 2 share outs.
Your question again, Laura?
Yeah, I'm just looking for about maybe 2 or 3 people to share out. What was this like for you? What came up for you in this experience of kind of walking around and thinking about these differently? And where do you feel strong? Where do you feel you need support? What came up for you?
I know I went to sanction as an area of support, just because I feel like I question myself a lot, like whether it was too harsh or not harsh enough, or, like if we found a balance, or I'll feel really strong and confident. And then an hour later, they're back in my office for the exact same behavior, or the next day. And so I think like the repeat offender was something that stood out to me.
But my kind of goal for you is to be connoisseurs of your response, like really like, what do these look like, thinking about them differently, and thinking, especially with very entrenched, difficult problems, have I hit all 3 legs of the stool? Because that is honestly how you get behavior to change, is all of them. I remember talking to Jeff Sprague about rewards and punishment, because they say like rewards, like you can get like 80% better behavior just by using positive reinforcement. Kid you not. Like if we really want to save time, honestly, like set up a friendly competition, do point card. Like if we're talking about efficiency, that's what you want to do, right? And Jeff kind of, he's a behaviorist, and he said, the fastest way to change behavior is to have a reward and a consequence and a punishment. He doesn't use the word consequence. He doesn't like it because it's like loaded and doesn't mean anything to a behaviorist. But he said punishment in schools is just really tricky. How do we do that well? And my question is, do we really want to be playing that game? How deep do we want to go in this? I mean, we have kids that come to us that experience such horrible kind of like their home life, that punishment at home, we could never exceed that. Or is that the competition that we're getting into, But there is room for sanctions. So we'll talk about that next session more. But I will give you a hint that if you look at a sanction as logical, linked to the behavior, definitely things that would help the kid repair the harm, whatever they did in the relationship of thing, that's kind of where you're going. Well, that's where we're going to go with this. So let's kind of dive in more for the restoration, because that really is the overarching tone that's going to carry the whole response, the whole restorative consequence through. So we're going to talk about, let me give you a few just off the cuff, idea of how you would put these together. So Tom Troublemaker watching loud YouTube videos in class and disrupting instruction by talking to his friends, right? So, and then you have, Robin Banks caught stealing gum out of her teacher's desk. And is he able, continually refuses to do any work during math instruction, right? So I'm gonna give you an opportunity. At the end, we're gonna be putting actually these case studies together and think about, what would I do for restoration? What would I do for the sanction? What would I do for an intervention? And so that's actually in your handout, these 3 scenarios. And I can tell you like a real life story of like Robin Banks. So we had a kid that was a 5th grader and having a lot of problems, right? Let's call her Robin. It was actually a boy, but that's okay. And Robin was struggling. And so as an intervention, they decided that Robin during recess would volunteer in her kindergarten teacher's classroom, who was like totally loved Robin and was happy to have Robin come back. So that's a great intervention, right? And so then one day when the teacher wasn't like had left the room or whatever, Robin stole the teacher's wallet. And it was really tough. The teacher was like, I don't want her back. This is really terrible. We were talking about what kind of consequence we were going to do, that they were going to do. And they ended up doing a restorative conversation between the 2 of them. And it went something like, what happened? What were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? Who was impacted? How can we fix it? And together they were able to share. The teacher was able to talk about, like I didn't have my wallet. So then I didn't have my ATM card. And then I didn't have my purse with my keys. So I couldn't pick up my kid. And I was late to pick up my daughter from school and she was frightened. And then I had to spend 2 hours like replacing my cards and calling and canceling. And teacher was really upset. And Robin, listened to that. And together, they talked about how Robin could make it right. And in the end, I'm trying to remember, I don't think that Robin had any, she did end up returning everything and all that lost time. I don't know if she did like an apology letter to the kid that was late to school, maybe something like that. But mainly what she ended up doing is volunteering more in the teacher's classroom to make her life easier, to like make up the time that was lost. So Robin was actually continued in the classroom, but did things like collating and stapling and making copies and running errands, and their relationship wasn't destroyed by it. And so there was, some extra time. I think some of it might have been after school. And so we'll be talking about like restoration, sanctions, and interventions as we move forward. That it doesn't always have to end up the way that things, that we kind of thought. So restoration, what we're really talking about is we want to heal relationships and repair the harm so that we can come back in community together. So restorative practices, yes, you're going to be running classroom circles that are going to develop community, because you can't repair something and restore something that you didn't have in the first place. So in order for this whole thing to work, what I'm describing, you actually have to have relationships with your students. The teachers do. Like you were kind of describing the teacher that didn't even know what to do to like connect with her kid. Like that restorative conversation is not going to go well because they don't have a relationship. So you need to build that through classroom circles, and then you'll manage conflict by repairing harm and restoring relationships. So 80% of our effort is doing classroom circles. And we talked about this when I visited your schools. That's our effort and time. About 20% of our effort and time is this response, which is what we're talking about today, is that responsive stuff. And in your continuum, classroom teachers are doing circles and using the questions in their class. And then we get into like tier 2 and tier 3. And these things go from classroom managed, less intensive, less structure and planning, where you do every day circles and talk questions and statements, all the way to office managed, more intense, more structured, more planning, less frequently. So because you are all school administrators, you're dealing with yellow, orange, and red. The teachers need to be building, that proactive stuff with the green. That's really where we're looking at that. So this is a continuum. So our aim is we're going to develop community, manage conflicts and tensions by repairing harm and restoring relationships. And you're going to use the restorative questions. So these were the questions that Terry O'Connell, when he visited the Maori people in New Zealand, that he wrote them down in English and he brought them over to the conference in Pennsylvania. I told you all the story before, and shared these questions with Ted Wachtel at a conference. And Ted Wachtel said, you know, he was running an alternative high school at the time, and he said, I've been doing this stuff for years. I just didn't know what it was called. And together they started the International Institute of Restorative Practices. So in the questions, you have question side 1, which are for the person who did the harm, and you have question side 2 for the person who was harmed. So when you were talking earlier about like teacher buy-in and how do we get, you know, and that idea of, or even parent buy-in, you know, sometimes what happens is we neglect to involve them using question side 2 for the teacher. So you could sit in your office and just ask the kid all these questions, but unless you walk them back to their teacher and ask the teacher question side 2, we're kind of missing the mark. So how many people are familiar with the restorative questions? Raise your hand. You've read them. Okay, good. So we're not going to spend a lot of time like reading them and reflecting on them. But we are going to kind of look at this in terms of kind of what would this be like for a kid, you know, to ask these questions, and for a teacher to kind of experience that. So when we have restorative consequences, if you walk kids through and staff through using the questions, you actually don't need to have a sanction or punishment, and you certainly don't need to exclude. The only exception for exclusion, I'd be, you know, you sleep it off or we cool it off, right? Sometimes there's a big event that occurs that you need to take some time to pull people together. So as you're going to learn how to run circles, you're going to learn that you need prep work and you need time. Like if it was a big, intense situation, you actually need to meet with everyone prior to make sure that they agree to come, that they're going to know the questions that are going to be asked, that they're going to follow the guidelines before they even come and sit down in that circle. That all takes time. So sometimes you may have a suspension, be it 1 or 2 days, because you have to pull together the circle to resolve the conflict and repair the harm. Okay, so that would be one reason. Another reason to have a suspension would be the kid was under the influence. They need to go away from school and sleep it off for medical reasons. That would be another reason for a suspension, but I believe they need to be back the next morning because I don't want kids with drug issues to be sitting at home alone. That's my personal feeling about that. And so that would be, you don't really generally need to exclude or punish. Now, if you have, say, a really disruptive fight, tensions are high, you know, we are not calming down by the end of the day, sure. But I can tell you in my last school district, we got to the point where most of the time we could get kids back and calm down and able to resolve a conflict, even when there was a fight within that day. So, but that happens over time, right? Restorative consequences decreases recidivism, meaning in a traditional justice system, recidivism is about 60%. When people are given a restorative option, it's only 10%, meaning behavior actually will change. So you have a much better chance of behavior changing when you engage in a restorative process. It's also better for victims. If you think about if harm ever happened to you, maybe think back at your school career when somebody did something to you. I know one time in high school, I was with this friend group, and I think someone like really thought that the paper, my creative writing paper, was so funny. Can they read it? And I sent them a digital copy, and she copied it. She turned it into her teacher. And I reported it, and I never heard what happened. Nobody told me anything. All I knew is my whole friend group wouldn't talk to me anymore. So I lost all my friends. And that happened to me in my first job when I was sexually harassed. No, I wasn't me. Actually, I wasn't sexually harassed. Another girl was. I reported it. And then like never found out what happened, you know, and then everybody turns on you. So honestly, that's what kids think is going to happen. That's why they don't like want to snitch, is life gets harder for them when they do. So if we really cared about the victim or the person that was harmed, we would engage in a restorative process. So we would hear their voice. Also, by the way, we're teaching some serious social emotional learning skills when we put people together when the harm has occurred, that they need to solve a problem, they need to have empathy, they need to reflect, and they need to have self-awareness. This is all like higher order kind of thinking skills here. So all of
Laura,
that can happen. Yes.
Oh, sorry, and I totally agree. And what do you do though if a student refuses to restore? Like, what do you do in that situation if like the
Yeah.
victim is wanting it and is ready for it, but the offender is like, nope, I'm not going to do it. I'm not
And
doing it.
and it can go either way. You also have times where the kid that was harmed doesn't want to do it, right? So in restorative practices, we never force anyone into a restorative process. With the exception, I would say, of your staff. I think we need to train them so they know what's happening. They know what it is. They know how to do these restorative conversations so that they're able. Usually it's just they're not sure what's going to happen if they're reluctant. But with students, families, parents, often they need to sit back and see the process happen for other people before they're willing to do it because they've had so many negative experiences. But I don't force people to do it. And in that situation, you still have your traditional system, right? That happy to do that if you'd like to do that, and that will eventually go away as well. It will take time, but eventually everybody just does it this way. You post the restorative questions in classrooms. The teachers use them when they talk to the kids. Hey, at this school, when things go wrong, these are the questions we ask. You send it in the back to school newsletter so parents know. You talk about it at back to school night. This is how we solve problems. We suggest you do it the same way at home. And these are great questions to ask and get people used to it so it's not so scary. I think having them posted in the hall when you're going to do those hallway conversations with kids, there's a certain justice to like just reading them together. It's this third point reference where I'm not just off the cuff doing it. We're going to go through these questions in a very predictable way, and that there's justice in that.
Thank you so much.
Helpful. And here's your recidivism numbers. So that 60% goes down to 10%. I think in schools it's more like 5%. Now, I will tell you that in my experience, I had one kid that he was having trouble, all of his classes, talking back, super difficult, out of a seat, all this stuff. Walk him to his teacher's class. We have this restorative chat. So I've asked him the restorative questions. What happened? What were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? Who's been impacted? You got to help them. Right? No, like, well, my teacher too. And, they need help with that. Well, how can we fix it? Okay. So we walk back. I invite the teacher in the hall. She willingly comes, puts her foot in the door so she can hear, has her kids do another activity. This is 6th or 7th grade math. And we have a restorative conversation and it went beautifully. She's like super nice person. And likes her students. And, I just really want him to do his work and pay attention. That was what she wanted. And she was able to talk about how it was hard for her. And in that moment together, they kind of negotiated what they, where he was going to sit and how she was going to cue his behavior. And they worked it out. I just was there, right? Went in from then on. They really didn't have many issues. However, this kid did end up, I don't think he was expelled, but he did end up changing schools. It might have ended up being an expulsion. But what it was is he did fine with her from then on. It was all the other classes. Which, I'm just telling you true stories. So that kind of makes me think, had we done that with all of his teachers, would he have actually been expelled? And so that's something we need to think about too. So accountability, I'm going to send you on break, but I want you to think about accountability because that was one thing that a couple of you brought up in our opening circle. So accountability, if we look at a traditional punishment sense, what we mean versus restorative is that the student or the person that broke the rule should be punished. That's what people mean. So on the news, when I hear so-and-so needs to be held accountable, this is what they mean typically. In a restorative frame, what we mean is that the person understands the impact of their actions. How are they going to do that unless they talk to the person I don't know? Really, how are they going to know? And often they don't really understand or have empathy until they're face to face, particularly kids. They need to see that other person hurting sometimes. not like in a manipulative way, but kids aren't sorry unless they're like seeing their teacher who's upset talking about how she couldn't go pick up her child on time, you know? They were just thinking about themselves because that's what kids do, right? So that's when the empathy comes. Also, they have to take responsibility. So if you have a student that's saying, I'm not going, I didn't do it, it wasn't me, then you really can't bring them together. It's really not, a good thing to do, because if they continue to deny it, that's not helpful. However, I will tell you that kids will not deny and lie and evade as much if you begin doing restorative practices, because they're not in trouble, right? We're really talking about impact, and we're going to come up with a solution that works for you, works for them. Because in schools, it's almost never like one harmer and a harmed. I mean, they do stuff to each other too. It's two-sided, which is relationships. So understand impact of actions, take responsibility, and then they actually repair the harm. They take active steps for restitution. And in the end, when you look at that restitution piece, that's where you're going to find your sanctions. What do they need to do with their bodies, with their mouths, with their hands? What work are they going to do to make it right? And that is where sanctions come into this. However, they are agreed upon by the people involved. You don't assign them if you want to be restorative about it. So that's the twist that you're going to get for next time. Okay, so when we come back, we're going to watch a video about a principal that the first time that he used the restorative questions, and it was a bullying situation. All right, welcome back from break. We're going to go ahead and watch this example of a principal for the first time using the restorative questions in a discipline situation. And he's Irish, so he's going to have an accent, so you have to focus a little bit. All right, here we go. Okay, what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to turn to your elbow partner, and I just want you to process what you just saw. What stood out to you? What were some moments for you that kind of made you think? Whatever stood out to you. So just I'll give you about 3 minutes to talk to your elbow partner. Okay, not a big table discussion. This is just a partner discussion. So let's do kind of a share out then of, a couple of groups to talk about what came up in your discussion. So sharing out.
So Chloe and I were both kind of talking about the same idea because we have recently had experiences with families similar to this. So we were listening to the administrator share how he called the families and told them how the children had solved this. And we were wondering, how did the families respond to that? Because some of our families might respond with, are you kidding me? This kid was bullying my kid and now you're encouraging them to spend more time together. So how do we help the families really see the power in this?
So can I ask you, so you both have the situation where you did this and you talked to the family, or you're saying you haven't done it yet?
So I had a situation with this exactly where the boys were totally great. They resolved to go play together. And I think part of my problem was I left a message about it because I wasn't able to reach the family. And then after the family came in irate, just how dare that kid not be suspended that hit their kid. And didn't like our policy. Yes. So it was a big challenge.
Right. Yeah, I think it is all in. This principal seemed to think that the phone calls would be sufficient. But this honestly that conversation is kind of where, as an administrator, you get to use all of your skills all at once, right? I mean, this is the big bucks kind of conversation because it's basically asking families to trust you. It's about developing trusting relationships with your families. How do you build trust, right? It's about consistency, predictability, beginning of the year. the letter goes home, this is how we solve problems. So, at our school, we do PBIS, and that looks like safe, respectful, responsible. We also do restorative practices. These are the questions we ask. That means your child may, we believe kids make mistakes and should be given an opportunity to fix those mistakes. And that might mean that your child, cleans up a mess that they make or fixes something they've broken, and will involve you in these things, let them know. And back to school night, talk about it. And they need to know, okay, at this school, that's kind of how it goes, And I mean, people have been doing this kind of work with kids before they even knew it was restorative practices, right? We're going to go walk around the playground and pick weeds together, and we're going to talk about what happened. I have a principal friend he's been doing that for 25 years, walking around this heart to heart with the kid. They're picking up weeds and and they're just talking and talking. And that is how he's bonding and processing and connecting with the kid, right? So it is about bringing them on board, letting them know it could happen. And, I've done, I remember having a conversation with a parent. It was like a 90-minute conversation one time, but basically coming really humbly to her and saying, I understand what you're saying. And I have a daughter the same age as yours. And what I want for my daughter is I want her to be able to, and we talked about being able to stand up and face the person that's harmed them and say, no, stop. I don't like that, and fix it, right? I want an empowered daughter. I mean, I've done this, not a lot, but when it called for it, talking about what do we really want for our kids? What do you want for your child? Because and I can tell you the research for victims that experience a restorative kind of process like this, their mental health outcomes are so much better than the person that victimized them just getting some sort of punishment, So this is actually better for the kid that was harmed too. So it's about bringing them along and with a lot of information and including them in the process. And sometimes you have to do circles with parents included, but you're not ready for that yet. But that's also involving them is going to be great, really helpful.
Do you have a copy of a letter that you've sent home before? Because I would love that.
Yeah, I do. Maybe Kelly, you can put on a little to-do list for me. I have one from another principal.
We'll talk about it in our coaching tomorrow morning, Laura.
Perfect. I can get you.
That'd be great, Laura. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really good. So this is Ted Wachtell, the founder of the International Institute on Restorative Practices. And he actually says in his experience over all the years of restorative practices, whatever is that, 40 years, that people tend to prefer, when they've gone through an entire restorative process, apology, forgiveness, reintegration. Symbolic reparation is more powerful and more satisfying for participants than any kind of material reparation. So, in other words, what I'm saying is when people get to the last question, what do we need to do to make this right? That is your answer. The person that's harmed, what they say they want, that's essentially your consequence. That's your sanction. If they want it replaced, fixed, whatever, the work that the other person needs to do, that is it. You don't need to add and layer and go beyond that. However, I told you the story where I took the kid to the math teacher. What did she want? She wanted the kid to just stop doing it. That was her request. And the kid apologized. He was forgiven. He was reintegrated back into class. And that was enough for them. And it needed to be enough for me, right? Who am I to tell her what she needed from that kid? She's the teacher. She's the one impacted, right? So this is the end, when you get into that decision at the end of it. So the restorative questions that you know very well, let's put them in the frame of things. So you're going to have teachers using them in the classroom. Ideally, a teacher would be able to have a heart-to-heart with the restorative questions and be trained in that. And you can, in the lesson 9, responding to problem behaviors and challenging behaviors in the classroom. I have an activity for you to do with your staff, and that is them asking and answering the restorative questions. So we're going to do that together today because they need to know how to do it in their room, because when it comes time for you to come to a restorative chat, they need to be really familiar with these questions, right? They need to understand them. So here are the questions. What happened? What were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? Who's been affected by what you did and in what way? What do you think you need to do to make things right? So these questions are for the person who did the harm. Now in schools, we don't use victim offender like labels. First of all, we don't want to label kids. They tend to be more judicial, perpetrator. These is legal language, and it's not helpful when we like put on the cloak of being, pseudo cops, and that's not who we are. That's not our role. We need police officers, but we also need educators. And so we are educators. And so we use the term, the person who harmed and the person who was harmed. The other reason to use those terms is kids dish it out, they take it, it's back and forth. And so labeling someone in that static, fixed way as being a offender or something, or even calling someone a victim, it's not really helpful because it's switching around all the time. And in schools, most often, these situations are very rarely one-sided. I mean, really, pretty rarely. So there's always something behind it, something that came, where the kid came from. So this set of questions is for the kid who did the harm. Then the second set of questions is for the kid or adult who was harmed. You can use these questions with kids and teachers, with kids and kids, with two staff members. I mean, these questions, if you understand how they kind of flow, you will take them and make them to every other restorative practice beyond this uses the restorative questions. Restorative chats, restorative mediations, restorative circles, they all use these questions. So it's really using them in different groups, different sizes, different ways. You really can't go wrong if you just pull them out. I'll tell you different ways that I have figured out using them, but honestly, if you just have them and use them with groups and individuals, you'll be fine. Now, so what I'd like to do is I want to do a role play with you, and this is one that you will then go back, show the video in session 8, is it, Kelly? Office referrals and restorative chats, or the one before that is actually you'll do it in responding to problem behaviors in the classroom. So that'd be 7. You're going to do this activity, and I want you to do it with me first so I can help you set it up. What we're going to do is you're going to find an across the room partner. I want you to find a partner that you don't know well. The person in the room you know the least. It makes it easier on you, okay? You're going to think about a situation in which you were harmed in the past. My request would be that you don't pick your worst trauma ever. We're not going to be able to overcome that one today. So a low level, issue that you've had, you're going to pair up with another person. And then one person is going to ask the restorative questions, number 2, and I'll put them on the screen. So these. One person will be asking and the other person will be answering. And then at 5 minutes, and actually I found we only need 3 to 4 minutes, but we can do 5. Then you're going to switch. Okay. So that's how that's going to work. So let's go ahead. I want you to stand up and find the other person in the room you know the least. And maybe turn, Kelly, if you can turn the computer around and I can see them a little bit.
You want me to turn the computer?
Or no, only if I can't see people, but it looks like it's working out. Does everybody have a partner?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Okay, who doesn't have a partner? Hey, Nick. Okay. All right, we're ready.
Okay, so I need one person in the set to raise your hand. Okay, you are partner number 1. You are going to start with the questions, asking the question here in number 2, right on the screen. partner number 2, you're going to share. What you're going to do is I want you to, before you start, tell them what you're talking about. Because you see here, the first question is, what did you realize? What did you think when you realized what happened? So give them one sentence, I'm just going to talk about what happened to me at the airport, or I'm just going to talk about something with my brother-in-law, a situation that I've been having with my brother-in-law. Like, give them a little context, or else they're going to be totally lost. Okay. Do not give them the whole story. What's important is that we practice asking the questions. Those of you asking, I want you to stick to the script. Don't skip questions. Just stick to the script, because we're going to reflect on how it felt to stick to the script. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and start the clock for 4 minutes. And then when the timer goes off, you are going to switch and trade roles. Ready? Any questions? Okay, go.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you're going to trade, and we're having partner switch. So now those of you that are going to share, you're going to first give a sentence about what you're going to talk about, and then the other person starts asking the questions. Got it?
Got it.
All right, ready, set, go. Okay, so have your attention here, please. What we're going to do now is we're going to process what we just did, okay? So a couple of questions I have for you. First question is, how, those of you, when you were asking the questions, how did that feel?
I think it feels a little bit forced, but it's kind of nice to have that referred to, so she knows I'm not just coming up with questions off the top of my head, that I'm referring to something specific and that we can both look at it while we're talking.
Yeah. It's a little awkward at first, or forced or something. Yeah. Okay.
I think we've been doing them for a little while now. So I experienced some of it as a teacher last year, being part of it, and now being more the mediator. So like, on a positive note, they're becoming less awkward, honestly. Like, the students now are like, oh yes, I've kind of done this before. Like, they understand that. The awkwardness comes when I'm trying to stick more to the script, because I do teeter, like I guess humans do, right? Like, we like take in the script and then we make it what we want it to be. And then I have to hold my fidelity check and go, nope, I have to like kind of trust the process.
Yeah.
But then when I go back to let's trust the process, I get stuck in questions that don't fit the situation. And then I find myself awkward, if that makes sense. I'm like, oh, well, the kids are like, and I'm like, well, yeah, maybe that one's not like perfect for that situation. So just, I guess, more practice, but I do find myself in that awkward sometimes when I try to go back to the script, but I think they are coming more natural to us.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that these questions are not the only possible restorative questions that there are. They just are the ones. One reason why I wanted you to stick to the script is to just feel the push-pull of it. I really encourage you in the beginning to try to stick to it as much as possible. How many people had this sensation like, oh, I wanted to ask more questions, like I wanted to get deeper? Yeah. So some of it, before I say anything else, let's ask, when you were answering the questions, how did that feel? Think about so before we talk about how to ask, let's talk to the people that, think about when you were answering. How did that feel?
Honestly, when she was asking, this incident happened like 2010, I think. I kind of got the butterfly feelings like when it first happened again. And this was like, a very long time ago, and not even in the same profession. But I kind of had the butterfly in my tummy, like, I'm trying to stick to answering the questions as they were, rather than adding more context, because she had no idea, what the situation was.
Yeah. So you, in a real life situation, she would know, you would know, there'd be more context. Yeah. But it's interesting that how the emotions came back. Can you tell me more about that? What did the questions do to bring that back?
I don't really think about it very often. So when I had to think about the whole process, I ended up quitting that job and getting into education after that incident happened. I was so frustrated with the way the two coworkers dealt with the situation. And it just kind of just brought me back to those conversations I had in my car, because I had to commute like an hour to get to work every day. And it just took me right back to that situation where I had all those again.
And imagine, had you been able to have a restorative process, you wouldn't be carrying that now, probably, at the time. Someone else to share how it felt for them to answer the questions.
It was interesting for me, the last question about what do you think needs to happen to make it right? It was funny because my response was like nothing, because I really don't care. And it made like what Nick and I have been talking about, like some of those kids who are just really resistant to the process because they don't, the ones who have been harmed, they just don't care to have that relationship with that person, or they're just not ready. And so it just really reminded me about that tier one and foundational about building relationships within your classroom, within your school, with your teachers, with each other, with everybody. Because if you don't care about having a relationship with that person, then you don't care about fixing that. And that's kind of where I was. It's like, nothing really needs to happen because, I'm done. Like,
well, right. And that's a very human response. Like, you hurt me, I'm not going to want to be near you very much. I think that's fair too, for someone to say, like, to fix it, I just want it to stop.
Yes.
I don't want it to happen anymore. And we'll see. We'll see if we're going to, and kids are way more forgiving than we are, sometimes. So, but that's why it's up to the person. And that wasn't a wrong response to not feel like I don't need any more. Like, I was in a terrible car accident about 8 years ago. And I knew all about this stuff, and like, I remember she was under the influence and rear-ended me at 50 miles an hour, and I was at a stoplight. And and I was hospitalized and everything like that. And I remember getting the police report and seeing her name and just having a name, like I had this emotion, but I didn't want anything from her. I didn't want to meet her. I was like, she had a rough enough time. I'm like, she, all this stuff. She went to jail. I didn't feel a need to resolve it with her personally or anything, and it was okay. She had her own like path to tread after that. So I think that's legit too. Like, to have someone question me like, oh, don't you have to have this process? I was all right, so there is that. So now can I ask you guys, when you were answering, did you feel like the questions were stilted and awkward, or did you feel heard?
No, I think no, just because there's that safety in knowing what to expect. I know that Nick's not going to surprise me with a question. Right. So for me, it's that level of like establishing safety and predictability of like, okay, he's not going to like ask me something that I didn't expect him to. So for me, that was like, even if it's stilted in terms of like, I know what he's going to ask me next, there's safety in that for me.
So maybe having the questions posted that kids can see what's coming could be helpful then for that. Yeah. What question was the most impactful for all of you? And it could be different for each person, but when you look back at these, which one kind of touched your heart the most?
What's been the hardest thing for you?
Anybody else? You have a different one? Oh, a lot of people. Why that one? Do you think?
I think because it's not just what happened in that moment. It's then I see that as more of like the continual part of it. I don't know. That's where I see like the hardest, like it's hard to describe. It's not just in that instant, it's how it affected you as a whole.
Mm-hmm. And did you notice, these questions, if you look at them straight on, you look like, it seems like we're just like beating a dead horse. We're asking the same thing like 4 times, right? And did you notice that you came up with a different response each time?
Yep.
And each one, like, you got a layer deeper and a layer deeper and a layer deeper until you're finally like, what's the worst part about this? What's the hardest thing for you? And I found the same. The hardest thing for me, that's always the one that gets to the heart of the matter. And that's always what I listen for when I'm talking to someone, because this is the part that needs to be fixed or we're not getting over this problem, right? So it's interesting, when I visited all of your schools and we did the presentation, I had everyone predict when they were if they were to answer these, if they'd been harmed, what would be the most impactful question? And almost no one picks that. They pick the repair question at the end. What needs to happen to make it right? Or they'll say impact. What impact did it have on you? So I think it'll be helpful when you do this activity with your staff, ask that question. Now, remember when Laura was here, you looked at these, you made a guess. Now we're going to do it and see how you feel, because they're going to, when you get to that bottom one, that what's been the hardest thing for you, you're emptying your bucket of pain. That's the at bottom of that bucket, and we got to get it all out in order to kind of get to that. So these,
Laura, can I
yeah, please. Yeah.
So I was involved in a discipline conversation yesterday with Summer, and then after that student and family left, we talked about it and we were like, that student has a really hard time verbal processing. So doing the restorative questions was difficult. So do you have any thoughts on that in terms of, should I have reverted maybe to using the early childhood ones because of just the developmental level with a verbal processing, maybe disability? Like, would that have been appropriate?
Absolutely. And let me see if I have that slide in here. Did I
have it on our, we have it on our
you may have
handouts.
it in your handout, but I was thinking for others. It looks like I don't have that slide, but it is in your handouts. The early childhood questions that Kelly's referring to is what happened? What were you thinking and feeling? What did you need? Who was hurt? How do we fix it? So when in real life you actually do this with your students, you will have to help them. They will not be able to answer on these questions when they've done harm. Who's been affected in particular? It's really difficult for them to reach beyond themselves. I was harmed. I was affected. My teacher hates me, you know. They need a lot of help, and it's fine to go off script as you're focused on helping them answer the questions, though, you know, for themselves. And so getting clear on that. So you can sit down now.
We also found helping each other paraphrase.
Sorry.
If we paraphrased what they said, it helped us process a little better too.
Yeah, use your skills. You know, what you're not going to do is things like, oh, that happened to me too, and take a bird walk talking to yourself, or, you know, that kind of thing. But absolutely do talk the way you need to talk you're an educator to help the kid understand. I mean, the what did you need question for early childhood, I learned that from a preschool teacher. She was trying to use these questions. We were adapting them. I had them all except that one. And she said she's asking them what they were thinking and feeling. They didn't know. They're 4. You know, but when she asked, what did you need? They were right on it. I needed the ball back or whatever, you know, I needed her not to be scratching me. And
so we asked this set of questions for either the person who was harmed or the person who did the harm.
What's your question?
So the early childhood ones, can we use that for?
Yeah, use it interchangeably. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can use, like, when I do mediation, honestly, I just take this questions too, and I do it for both people. And you just ask the same set. You can use these questions 100 different ways, and you're not going to break the children. It'll be fine. And, you know, you can go into it thinking, oh, I want this or X or Y or Z to happen, but you don't know. Half the time, when I have a restorative conversation between a kid and a teacher, the teacher knows what they want to have come out of it. And by the time they're done with the conversation, they want something totally different. It's okay, because this is humanity. And they're, you know, if you notice, they're structured in a past, present, future structure. So what did you think when you realized what happened, or what happened, right? What were you thinking at the time? And then present, what have you thought about since, and how have you been affected? And then future, what do you need to do to make things right? It's like a story. So we take people from, you know, you talked about having butterflies in your stomach, but like from angst and anger and pain to like, now I'm just mad about it, or whatever in the middle. And by the end, there's like hope and healing, because we've moved someone psychologically through a really hard thing. And as we move forward, making things right, we're actually taking action. We're not just going to sit around and have conversations in the office. We're bringing people together. We're healing harms. So that's how that kind of works. Now, if you were to teach this to your teachers, what you want to do is you want them to teach their students a routine and have a procedure for this. So you're PBISers, right? So you know what I mean. Essentially, whenever your teachers get interrupted when they're teaching, like a phone call, someone comes to or whatever, they have some sort of process, right? They should. Everyone, please get out your silent reading books. Everybody, please look at the list of makeup work, whatever it is. I need a couple minutes. I'm going to, have this conversation. So they need to have a routine to get kids to work independently so they can do this. They also probably want at the beginning of the year to tell the students, hey, when we have problems or issues in our class, these are the questions that we ask. So you're not in trouble, but if I need to talk to you, I'm going to ask you to step over here. And if you need to talk to me, we'll step over here. You just need to let me know, right? And then the rest of the class, what I'd ask you to do, if we have the, need to go talk over here in this part of the room, usually it's kind of over by the door or something. My request for you is you get out this and then you do this, and this is your independent activity, right? If it's math, they're going to get out their time test, whatever it is. So the teacher knows an appropriate curricular thing to do, and they should already have these routines, right? Like when someone comes to the door that everyone melts down, they need to get them doing something else. And how long did this conversation take you? From one side?
4 minutes.
I gave you 4. How many of you needed all 4? No, you didn't. So what I'm saying is literally the teacher could have a 2-minute conversation with a kid using these questions. It's all about the tone. Hey man, what's happening? This isn't like you. What are you thinking and feeling, and who's being impacted, and right? Like it's all in the conversation, and it can literally be like over on the side of the room. They can step into the hallway if the teacher prefers. If they have a class that they can turn their back on, fine, keep the door propped open. So teach the kids in advance how to work, and then you reinforce the kids on task. That's a PBIS strategy. Thank you for getting your book out. Thank you for getting it. Great. Okay, John, let's go. Right? Then privately, you ask the restorative questions. You do not do this in front of the group. You are not going to get any kind of like real response. And the teacher needs to listen to feelings and needs here. Be open to hearing the part that they could have played in the situation. I've had kids say, hey, that really embarrassed me when you called me out in front of everybody, that really made me mad, or, I don't think you like me. I mean, I've had kids say all kinds of stuff to teachers. And then the teacher's like, I'm really sorry. I did not mean to embarrass you. Like, how else can we do this? Because I do need you to follow directions, and then they work it out. So, but they need a space to be able to do that. Now, you're going to have some teachers, they don't have a class that they can do this with yet, particularly after COVID, like kids coming back, kind of wild children. But our goal is to get them to be able to do this kind of thing. So that would be kind of that idea. So are you all ready to give this a try? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a scenario. Are most of you elementary or secondary?
Even split.
Okay, so we're going to do that. What we're going to do is, if you are an elementary person, I want you to do the elementary situation. If you're secondary, you're going to do secondary. I need you to partner up with, let's see, the way I have it is 3. So what we need is a teacher, a student, and an observer. So in the secondary scenario, the situation is a student keeps making derogatory comments to other students in their class, rolling their eyes and saying, how stupid can you be? You're the teacher, you've corrected the kid twice, but he keeps persisting. You're going to get all the students to work independently, and you're going to ask the kid to step outside to talk. So you're going to use Restorative Questions 1, okay? You're going to use these questions with the kid. One of you needs to be the teacher who wants to practice. The other one's going to be the kid. Now, those of you playing the kid, I want you to be a rational, reasonable human being. Do not be the most difficult kid. You want them to have like a relatively reasonable experience doing this. And then observer, you're just going to watch the exchange and then participate in their debrief about how it felt, okay? So here's the situation. Oh, it looks like I only have one situation because this can be upper grade, or it can be middle, or it can be high. So I have just the one, okay? So go ahead, find yourself in groups of 3. And then I will, and if you really want to be the teacher for practice, then let your group know. Okay, go ahead and stand up and find your group. Okay, we're going to process what we just did, starting with the teacher. All right, teachers, what were some things that came up for you?
I had kind of a stinker of a student,
Okay, being a little difficult.
a little bit of an attitude, but it was good because then I had to adjust a little bit and dig a little deeper first to kind of get her to answer the questions and come to the realization of how her behavior impacted others.
Yeah, you got to work at it. Sometimes they don't always get it right off, especially when they're used to like systems that are punishing, right? No kid in their right mind is going to fess up to tell the truth about something, you know? So that's why in restorative practices, we don't ask why you did it and tell me the truth and investigate. We just ask, you know, what happened and what was the impact of it. We focus on what impact it had. Sometimes we kind of skip over the whole like fact finding. Well, let's just talk about who was impacted by it, you know? And sometimes that can be enough. Yeah. And in this situation, the teacher was there, right? So there was not a lot of what happened. Like I saw what happened. We were both there. So what else? Another teacher.
I'll go. I was partners with Chloe, and Chloe was not difficult. Thank you, Chloe. What I did tell her was, as a teacher, I wanted to ad lib or do something. So, but sticking to the script helped me guide a little or keep it going. And so, although I didn't have to like push her to do much out of there, it did help me come to a resolution without like the blame game. Like, oh, I corrected you twice. What were you thinking? Kind of thing. So
Yeah, that's right.
Help you stay on track, because I don't know where the temperament of the teacher is at that particular moment, but you never know. And so if you do have a teacher that was maybe not fully there, and they did try to stick to the script, it might help them mend that relationship faster than kind of like going off the cuff and blaming the student.
That's a good point. Yeah, because you know we really don't want to enter these when we're upset, right? You're not going to be reflective. It's not going to go well. The kid's going to feel that. You want to be relatively calm. But yeah, like just the way that the questions run, even if you are as an adult a little bit like, hey, this isn't going great, but you're willing, it probably is enough. Yeah, good point. I like that. Any other teacher comments?
So if we did this in real life, or was the goal of the activity just to practice being the teacher? Or if this happened like in the real world, which happens every day, is the teacher going to then mediate themselves? Like, I'm just wanting to see like where this would fit into like our systemic way of like addressing the different tiers of behavior.
Yeah, they could. I mean, they could kind of talk about answer side too, but I think just talking to the kid is usually enough. What do we need to do to fix this? The teacher is going to help the kid see the impact on themselves and other people. And then usually this is all they really need. But they could. I know some teachers do both sides, like they're really quite into this and skilled, and they'll ask the kid questions too, and then they'll answer question one to the kid and question two. That is later though, the more advanced, not advanced, but in a more serious situation when you've called for a restorative chat, like an office referral. The person actually comes to the room and facilitates both sides of the questions. But this situation is something that I chose because it's really like indicating it's not horrible. The teacher can handle it, but the kid is indicating there's something wrong with inside of them, right? That's probably what came up. So let's talk about the student perspective. What was it like for you to be the student and to answer these questions? Did you get in your role pretty good?
Well, it's funny because, she said I was being a stinker, but I was answering the way I would have answered. Like I have been that student who's annoyed by kids interrupting with dumb questions, even though there are no dumb questions, so I just answered with how that bothered me as a student. Like I was the one impacted. So it was interesting how she was able to use those questions to bring me back to thinking about how I impacted others.
Yeah. And really like, because I was like that too. And like helping me see like probably better ways to better ways to handle this than that, like you can have that conversation, maybe not in 2 minutes, but you could be like, come visit me lunch. Let's talk more about like what they need, blah, blah, blah. Like something came up that was of interest to the teacher, whatever. You could do that too. Okay. Other students, how did it feel to have the questions asked like that, the way that they were?
I was observing, I wasn't the student, but I was observing Summer, and when Natalia asked her the question, who's been affected by what you've done and in what way? Summer was kind of like, ooh, what I've done, like that. It almost like it like made her defensive. Was it defensiveness that I observed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed that about that question too. And sometimes I'll just ask, well, who was impacted by that? But yeah, it is a very direct question because they really are wanting people to own their stuff, Yeah.
I do like the end of it, like what have you done? I think that brings a little bit more of a definitive question to like, and just brings more, attention to that incident that you did, not just like a general, you've been naughty during, circle time or whatever, just like this one particular.
And really at that point in the conversation, they've already said kind of what happened. They've talked about their perspective of what they were thinking and feeling. And you may need to milk that for a while. Like if it's a bigger incident, it's not going to be done in 2 minutes standing there. They're going to have a little walk with a facilitator or something. And they've processed that. So now you're moving, okay, let's think about other people, right? So it's time to talk about other people at this point. But yeah, it's both. So observers, what did you see? What did you notice overall, things that stood out to you?
2 things stood out to me as an observer. One was that the questions kind of naturally led the student to zoom out of just themselves. Like instead of just I was interrupted, that question was stupid, it bothered me, to kind of, Sandy had to kind of prod a little. So who else was impacted? Who else was affected? And it kind of forced that zoom out and looking at other people's points of view. The other thing that I thought was cool is that it kind of gave the teacher like a moment, because what do you think you need to do to make things right? She said like, well, I cannot call people stupid, but they need to stop asking stupid questions in the middle of the lesson. And it showed the teacher like, well, maybe I could do something to prevent it next time by like doing a parking lot, or like, let's wait till the end of my lesson. We'll take them at the end, and just kind of showing the teacher a way to like approach the situation too.
Yeah. It's good. Okay. Any other thoughts about this experience? So this activity is also in your materials, in your course, that you can do this with your staff and have them practice. And the next thing that you're going to learn, and we're going to spend time on this in, I don't know what date it is, Kelly, but it's restorative chats. So this is when it's different than just the teacher pulling the kid aside. The teacher has decided this is like an office referral worthy thing. But instead of the kid going to the office, you come to the classroom. So that's the difference. But again, we're going to use the same questions. So here we are, kind of tier 2 now. And the reason I think of it as a tier 2 is we're moving out of the classroom. It's involving more structure, more planning, less frequent thing to happen than what the teacher would be doing in the classroom. Okay, so it's a little more like it's involving more people. So I would call it a tier 2 intervention. And it is different than an office referral. However, for a low level thing, I would say at the beginning, start just using the restorative questions in the office, then work on getting your body out to the classroom, like as a system. So it's really the same conversation, but you're actually moving from this is way more efficient, basically. So in office referral, the kids are out of class more, right? The teacher doesn't have any voice in it, because this is the fatal flaw with office referrals is the kid goes to the office, you talk to them, and like you said, you do all this great stuff. The teacher never knows about it, and then they're just mad, right? You might as well save your breath and do the whole thing in front of the teacher, honestly, because it's just wasting your time. Here we're going to acknowledge the teacher's feelings. We don't even know. We just have the kid's version of what happened when they go to the office. We don't actually know what happened from the teacher's perspective. We want to maintain relationships and strengthen community. We don't want to break relationships and weaken community. With an office referral, there's not a lot of behavioral change because you can just sit in there, maybe call home a few threats or something like that, that's all you can do. But when you actually get the kid with the teacher, chances of behavioral change are much greater. So the way it would work, if you did it this way, is instead of the teacher writing an office referral and sending the kid, they could still write an office referral. You need to record it in your data systems. It still counts as a referral in terms of like your discipline data. You need that number. That's going to be helpful for you. But they call for a facilitator. Now, who's a facilitator? I don't say administrator here on purpose. There are fabulous facilitators that are not administrators. We trained, I would say, and what I would recommend for you is having a team at your site, an administrator, all of the administrators, maybe a counselor, your yard supervisor. You guys have student support specialist people. Like train a small group of people that are not tied to a classroom or a place, like that can move. Okay. And what we did, I've had some schools, they'll set up a schedule from 8 to 10. It's, Chloe and Kelly. And then from, 10 to 12, it's a different two people that are on call. You go to the room, but you're not on call all the time. And then not to set like schedule appointments during that time. And basically the facilitator comes. So it doesn't have to be the administrator. It could be a counselor, it could be a campus supervisor, someone who's trained. They arrive at the door. They first ask the kid to step into the hallway and they talk to them privately using the restorative questions number 1. So they're going to go over the questions with the kid and get them ready to talk to their teacher, because likely they're pretty upset because they just yelled at their teacher, F-U-B, right? They just yelled at her or whatever. Something happened. So they're upset. So instead of going to the office, you come down. It's also going to minimize the likelihood of that kid getting into more trouble by walking from the classroom to the office. You're going there. You calm the kid down. The facilitator calms the kid down, asking what happened. What were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? Who was impacted by that? What do we need to do to fix it? And so you get the kid ready. They're owning up on their part of it, at least part of it. And then when they're ready and calm, you bring them back to the classroom. You knock on the door. And then you ask the teacher to step out into the hallway. And then you ask the teacher, you ask the kids questions 1 in front of the teacher. Now they're articulate and calm, and the teacher can hear it. And then you ask teachers question side 2, which is what you all just experienced now. So, what did you think when you realized what happened? And what's the hardest thing for you? And what do you want to fix it? All that. And then, together they're going to negotiate what they want to do to fix this problem, and you're just there as a facilitator helping them have the conversation, but it's their problem. It's not yours. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Laura, because we like a million of these last year. One thing that I found really helpful is I told the student and the teacher to not look at me. I'm just asking the questions, but this is a conversation that's happening between the two of you. Like you're not apologizing to me. And like, this is between you guys. So then I feel like because we're so used to someone asks a question, we respond to them. They weren't used to that. So training them to face each other. I'm just like the conduit of these.
Did you have the questions posted? I'm just curious, like in the hallway for them to look at?
No, I had them on like a lanyard, or not a lanyard, laminated. So that would help.
If they were posted, they turn there sometimes and they look and then they'll look at each other and the eye contact gets better through the conversation. But yeah. I tend to not want to do too many corrective statements when I'm doing this. I try to stay really neutral. So if they're looking at you, what I would suggest you do is you go ahead and turn your eyes and look at the person they're supposed to be talking to. And then or look down on the ground, one of the two.
I usually look down at the ground. So
yeah, that's good. Yeah, look down or look at the person they're supposed to be talking to and then let them, they just naturally, their eyes will follow. And then you don't have to correct them because what you don't want to do is correct them when they're already in this kind of tense situation.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. But so this is how this works. And of course, if the kid isn't ready or the teacher's not ready, we set up another time, and that's how that kind of plays out. So you're going to have training on how to do these later. in a month or so, I think. I don't know when, but we're gonna, do you want to say?
It's our December all admin.
Okay,
But I mean, you guys can watch module 8.
yeah, and you can watch it. Yeah.
Got the materials.
So our next one, Laura.
Right.
So we actually have her in October as well.
And
And this series continues in a few weeks, right?
yeah,
Next.
so we're,
October 18th is part 2 of this 3-part series.
yeah, so
October 8th.
next time we get together, which is right around the corner, we're going to talk about sanctions. So you have this foundation of we're using the restorative questions, we're really getting to the heart of the matter. You can't come up with a good sanction unless you have a restorative conversation and find out what do people want. The person that's harmed should have a say in what happens, right? And so that's why we teach sanctions after teaching restoration, or why I do. So that's where we're going with this. So next time when we get together, we will be doing sanctions as part of our restorative consequence. So we're not throwing it out the window. We're still going to have them. But what can they look like? Ideally, that are non-exclusionary, so we can keep kids in school and heal relationships.